Coming up is Friday night science, November 3rd. And weather permitting, there'll be telescopes, so you can see the stars or the moon. Hands-on activities, if you have children, grandchildren, you'll bring them along. Everything's free, except for the planetarium, which I believe is $5. And from 7 to camp, Friday night on November 3rd. And for those of you with family, children, grandchildren, they'll be celebrating Halloween on Saturday, October 28th. If you come in costume, it's free. Lots of activities for the family and kids. Okay, so I am going to let Richard Anderson, who is another member of the Science Open Committee, introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Denise. And I'm Richard Anderson. About 30 years ago, we started something called Kickback Science Seminar. And some of the teachers here might remember those. Okay. Well, it evolved into the Science Colloquium. He has to stay near me because it's for the camera. And so here we are, and I appreciate your coming. And please tell people that you know to come for extra credit or just come. We have a few diversity. We have a husband here. We have Cliff, who's from the retirees of Michael. And then we have Denise, she's retired. And Debbie Bolter, great anthropology teacher here. Raise your hand, Debbie. Yeah, take her class if you're not done with the sciences. Okay, well, Carlo Vasquez was originally from the Bay Area. Then his family moved to Turlock when he was 4. So Central Valley became his homeland. He attended UC Merced and graduated in 2019 with his degree in human biology and a minor in public health. His public health career journey started at UC Merced, where he was a student employee at the Campus Advocacy Resources and Education Office, where he did sexual violence prevention education. In December of 2020, he was hired by Stanislaus County Health Services Agency as a health educator for our COVID response. In spring of 2023, he moved to become a health educator for the communicable disease team. In his Q&A, perhaps someone would like to ask, just what's included in a human biology curriculum at UC Merced? It sounds interesting to me. Please welcome Carlo. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. Thank you. So let me go ahead. Let's make me project the way that there it is. Well, we did a fade and everything. Hold on. Okay, perfect. So can everyone hear me in the back? Great. Okay. Oh my God, there's a light. Okay, great. Oh no.
Oh no.
Can we turn this on? Hold on. I'm just gonna stand over here. Okay, great. So thanks everyone for letting me exist here in this time and space with you here. Like Richard said, my name is Carlo Vasquez. I'm the health educator for the communicable disease section at Stanislaus County Health Services Agency. We're the public health for the county. And I use he and they pronouns. So today, the name of my talk is Contagions in Your Community. I'll be talking to you about 3 different diseases here today: valley fever, West Nile virus, and congenital syphilis. I also hope you'll accept my apologies for a little bit of a misleading title. One of those actually isn't a contagion because it's not contagious between other people. That's oh no. Oh no, my slides. So valley fever actually isn't technically a contagion, but also we love alliteration. So I hope you'll forgive a little bit of artistic license there. When it comes, when it comes to those 4 diseases, I'm going to be hopefully answering 4 questions for each of those diseases. First one is, I'll go over some really fast, what is it? What is this disease? We'll go over some behaviors that you can do to help prevent that from happening to you and your loved ones. We'll go over some special things that we're seeing here in the Central Valley that make us a little bit unique when it comes to that disease. And we also got a special request to see how climate change is affecting each of these diseases as well. When it comes to that question, I think all of you will fall into one of three camps. Either you will be very excited, very disappointed, or both at the same time. So stay tuned to see which one it is that you will fall into. Okay, so the first disease we're going to talk about is valley fever. So I have a question. Does anyone want to challenge themselves to pronounce this, the scientific name for valley fever? Anyone? Just raise your hand. Give it a go. I know, there's a lot of people in here. Good turnout. Yeah, right here.
Coccidioidomycosis?
Yeah. So you're actually really close. So it's coccidioidomycosis. Yeah, so a lot of people miss that ido part right there in the middle. So coccidioidomycosis. Normal people just call it valley fever. So that's what we're going to be calling it today. That said, all of these fancy smanchy science words really do have a purpose, right? So all of these scientific words really are exactly what they say on the tin, as long as you understand what that language is. So if you break that fancy scientific word up into three parts, you get this: coccidioidomycosis, right? And each one of those words has a very specific meaning in science-ese. So now splitting all of these, splitting these three elements apart, I want to also challenge all of you again to see if you can figure out exactly what thing causes this disease. I'll even give you a hint. So coccidioido refers to the species or genus of exactly what it is that's causing this disease. It's the Coccidioides. So what we have left is myc and osis. Does anyone want to guess what type of pathogen causes this disease? Yeah, over there.
I'm talking about the spores that are in the ground.
Yes, exactly. Yes, good job. Okay, so myc is fungus. So if you ever see something that says MYC, that's referring to a fungus, the study of mushrooms, for example, mycology. And osis is status. So exactly like we heard here, right? So valley fever is a disease caused by the status of having these fungal spores of the in your lungs when they shouldn't be there. Yeah, so good job. So obviously when these spores are in your lungs, it's going to cause some problems because your body doesn't like having fungal spores inside of it, right? Some of these symptoms are what we see here, right? So it's things like fatigue, cough, fever, shortness of breath, headaches, night sweats, muscle pains, and rashes. A lot of the time, usually, if someone has valley fever, their symptoms could last for weeks to months. If someone's really unlucky, this is something that could last for a really long time, potentially up to years before they get over these symptoms as well. So looking at these symptoms, does this sound like anything else? Like these symptoms sound like they could potentially be some other disease, right? What are some of those diseases that we can think of with similar symptoms? Okay, I heard pneumonia. What else? I think I heard flu somewhere over there. Yeah, flu is one. One more time.
The Rona.
Yeah, the Rona. Yes, Miss Rona, coronavirus. Yes, COVID-19, right, really has similar symptoms to this as well, right? So as I'm going through this valley fever section, I want all of you to kind of keep that in mind. Think about what that might mean for when it comes to treatment and recognition of this disease. Speaking of treatment, usually there's none needed, right? So unfortunately with valley fever, there isn't a specific this destroys valley fever type medication. The good thing about that is that most of the time, someone might not necessarily need to get specifically treated, right? It's just going to take a couple of weeks to months, but they'll feel better all by themselves in no time. Every so often, especially for people who might be at high risk for really, really bad disease, so mostly it's people with weakened immune systems or people who are a little bit older, then a doctor might decide to give them an antifungal medication to help clear that out of their system instead. Okay, so here's some pictures of those spores. So valley fever exists kind of in two different forms. When the valley fever is just kind of like hanging out in the soil, it's going to be this form that's here in this blue on the, what is this? It's your left sides here. We call these the arthrocondia, and this is the shape that the valley fever spores just take when they're just hanging out in the soil, living their life. If the soil gets jostled around, there's all of this dust, these spores get into the air, you breathe them in, then they can get into your lung tissue, and then they become this shape here, a spherule. So here you can see in that in this pink image, this kind of like big round thing that has little grains in it, that's not supposed to be there. That's not normal lung tissue. What that is basically, it's almost a bomb of tiny little other spores as well. So as this spore gets into your lungs, it kind of makes itself a home and then starts making more and more little baby spores inside of it. Eventually, this big spherule is going to explode. Guess where all of those spores are going to go? Into your lungs more, and potentially even into the rest of your body. And obviously, like I said, that's going to cause some problems to your health. Okay, I'm talking about prevention now. When it comes to prevention, the easiest way to not get valley fever is just don't breathe in dust that could have valley fever in it. And there's, of course, a couple of ways to do that, right? So one of those things is things like wearing a well-fitting mask to filter the dust. A mask like I'm wearing today is going to give you some protection versus just like breathing it in, no protection at all. But really what you're looking for is an N95, KN95, one of those respirator style masks that's really going to filter all of that dust out of the air for you. Also, just avoid dust producing activities, right? So things like yard work, digging, mowing the lawn. This is your excuse to not mow the lawn because who likes doing that? If you have to do that, you know, your lawn's getting way, you know, it's not a lawn anymore, it's a jungle. There's a few steps that you can take in order to reduce the amount of dust you produce. So things like wetting it down a little bit, running over it with just like a watering can or the hose, doing things like that as well. Something else really simple is just stay inside when it's dusty. So we're out here, you know, here in the Central Valley, all of the almonds, they're going to shake those almonds off of the tree. If you see that happening, you see the gigantic cloud of dust encroaching upon you, go ahead, just stay inside, keep the windows closed. You can take your walk after that's over. Okay, so why is the Central Valley unique when it comes to valley fever? So there's two main reasons for this. First one is that valley fever is endemic. That means it's native to the Southwestern United States, right? So valley fever is something that you're really only going to see in California, Nevada, Arizona, and some parts of Central America as well. From the valley fever's point of view, we are the invasive species in their home. And because of that, because valley fever really you only see is native to this area, you really only see it in this area. And so cases of valley fever in like New York, on the East Coast, even in Europe, are super, super rare. So now, a few slides ago, I asked all of you to keep in mind all of those different symptoms and all of those different things that those symptoms could be. So combine that with this second point here. So valley fever is super rare outside of its endemic regions. What are some problems that we can think of based on valley fever being super rare and also has symptoms that are really similar to a whole bunch of other diseases. What do we think? So if let's say someone in New York, okay, so let's say one of us goes on a trip to New York and we end up coming down with some of these symptoms. Do we think that if we go to the emergency room, they're gonna automatically think to check for valley fever? No, exactly right. So we know of documented cases where people have had these mysterious flu-like symptoms for months or years. They have no idea what's going on. And they're getting medication. The medication is not working because the doctors that they're seeing aren't aware that valley fever is a thing. And so they're giving them antivirals or they're giving them cold medicine when really what they need is an antifungal treatment to treat the valley fever. So a reason that we're unique when it comes to valley fever. Okay, so still with valley fever, how does climate change affect valley fever? So when it comes to this, it's emerging science. So ultimately, we can't really draw any conclusions of yes, no, what happens yet. A lot of this is because the timescale at which climate change science happens and what they're concerned about is really long, right? We're talking like centuries, millennia, talking about that, slow burn pattern of climate change here. But when we're talking about valley fever, for example, this graph here only goes until 2001. So compare 2000, compare 20 years ago to potentially 200 or 500 years, which is the scale that climate change science is really looking at. The time scales are not matching. And so that's why a lot of the science is still kind of in progress here. That said, we can learn a couple of things and kind of like detect some patterns that we are already seeing. So this graph here shows the amount of cases of valley fever in each year from 2001 to 2021 here in California. In public health, we call this an epidemiology curve or an epi curve. So what are some things that we're noticing about the shape of this epi curve? Yeah, so it's going up in general, but what about kind of the curviness about it? Yeah, right here.
There was a big dip in 2014,
Mm-hmm.
2013, 2014, 2015.
Yes. Yeah, exactly, right. So we're seeing some really big dips in that cases, in the number of cases, right? So I'll go ahead, highlight them there, right? So on this graph, you can see these two kind of valleys in the graph where the number of cases that we saw during that time period was really low. It's kind of hard to see what the years are here, so I'll go ahead and read them. It's from 2007 to 2009. And then the second big dip is from 2012 to 2016. So now think back to that time period. What were some weather-related and climate-related occurrences, things that were happening here in California during those time periods? Yes, a gigantic drought. So both of those time periods were times that there were these really, really bad droughts. And so a possible relationship that is being looked into currently is whether or not droughts reduce the rates of valley fever. So yeah, congratulations, good job kind of connecting those dots. So once again, this is all emerging science. This is something that we're going to have to continue to look into throughout the, not just years, but literal decades to see if this is a pattern that continues to hold true. Yeah.
Well, I just have a question from the earlier years,
Mhm.
numbers are so low.
Yeah.
One question that I think is wondering is the ability, the reporting or tracking
Yeah.
Valley fever, has that improved over the years?
Sure. Yeah. So disease surveillance. So the question was, here we see that, the valley fever already started out low here in 2001. So the question was, has valley fever surveillance and tracking kind of improved through the years? And the answer is yes. So just in general, among all diseases, surveillance and tracking and just making sure that we're keeping track of how things are going has increased and become just better and better. Yes. So unfortunately, also pointed out, right, that this graph here starts at 2001. I wasn't able to find data before 2001. So if there was, then maybe that would be something also to look into to see if we can track the droughts using this valley fever epidemiology curve. Okay. Let's see. Okay, West Nile virus. So West Nile virus is a viral disease caused by mosquitoes. When it comes to West Nile virus, symptoms are a little bit interesting because usually there's no symptoms. So about 80% of people who have West Nile virus don't even realize that they have West Nile virus because they just don't feel anything, right? Probably all of us have had bug bites, right? And I think that a good majority of us just like, ow, that's very itchy, but then you don't go to the doctor to go check if something has happened to you. Uncommonly, so about 20% of the time, people develop what we call a febrile illness. That means it's an illness that causes a fever. Some of the symptoms they might have are the fever, headache, body ache, nausea, vomiting, and sometimes a rash as well. And something even more rare. So we see this less than 1% of the time, about 1 in every 150 cases, is really bad West Nile virus, what we call neuroinvasive. That means neuro is your brain and your nerves. Invasive means it has entered into those areas. So it's this West Nile virus that is causing encephalitis, inflammation of the brain, and meningitis, so inflammation of some of the different nerves in your body. And this is potentially really serious, could cause people permanent effects and also potentially cause people to die as well. With West Nile virus, so once again, unfortunately, there is not a specific West Nile virus treatment as well. Good news is, once again, 80% of cases that have West Nile virus don't even realize they have West Nile virus. So in those cases, people usually don't need treatment. If someone does need treatment, what we're actually going to be treating is the symptoms, right? So if someone has a fever or headache, they might take some Advil or Aleve to go ahead and make themselves feel better. Certain people who are at especially high risk, so we're talking mostly elderly people, people who are pregnant, might go to a hospital to receive supportive care. But once again, that hospital is just going to be treating the symptoms, making them feel better. And also in case they need some sort of help, they're already at the hospital. So that's kind of why they would go there as well. When it comes to West Nile virus, the way that you can prevent yourself from getting it is by following the 4 Ds of not getting bug bites, basically. So I'll go over each of the 4 Ds. I guess technically it's 5 Ds because one of them is a 2-for-1. But the first D is DEET. DEET is the active ingredient in most insect repellents. So use an insect repellent with DEET or some other of a few different approved active ingredients. If you just go to the store and you grab insect repellent, it's probably going to be DEET. Next one is duress. So we really recommend covering as much skin as possible because the less skin that's exposed is the less surface area for the bugs to come and attack you, right? So things like wearing long pants, long sleeves, a hood, a hat, something like that. Drain, the next D is drain. Drain standing water on your property. Mosquitoes love water. That's where they have their babies. That's where the babies grow up. So if there's any water kind of like in your backyard, guess what? There's going to be lots of mosquitoes in your backyard. So draining that water gives them less of a chance of reproducing. And also if they do reproduce, they're not going to do it right next to you. So that's also great. And the next Ds are dusk to dawn. So we know that mosquitoes are nocturnal. They are awake during the nighttime. So anytime from dusk to dawn. So just avoid them when they're awake, and then they won't be awake to bite you. Okay. So West Nile virus. What is interesting about West Nile virus here in the Central Valley? What's interesting is that we have a really high rate of West Nile virus in Stanislaus County. So, we have really similar case numbers. So we reported about 28 cases here in Stanislaus County. For reference here, compared to, let's see, Sacramento has about the same amount as us. Los Angeles also has about the same amount as us. But Sacramento County is 3 times as big as us. And LA County is way bigger than us. I don't even know what the exact number is, but they're gigantic, right? So if we had a really similar kind of case rate that we're seeing, we would expect Sacramento County to have about 60 cases, but they don't. So that's something that's really, really interesting about our area. Something about what we're having is making mosquitoes love us. There's been a couple of hypotheses for what this is. The main reason that we're thinking that that we have a lot of West Nile virus this year is because of how rainy it was this past winter, right? I don't know if all of you probably remember, but there were literal floods, gigantic evacuation maps that happened just within Modesto, not even thinking about all of the rest of the places in the county as well. And so all of that water, of course, is going to give mosquitoes a lot of places for them to have babies, and then of course, to spread West Nile virus all around. Okay, I have another question for all of you, right? So at Public Health last month, we did a press release talking about how many cases of West Nile virus we had. We reported 28 cases of West Nile virus, and 19 of them were neuroinvasive. So remember, I mentioned that neuroinvasive cases are super duper rare, less than 1%. So how could we possibly have 19 cases of neuroinvasive West Nile virus? What do we think? Say louder.
You're not aware of the other cases.
There you go. Yeah, so the answer is that we might not necessarily be aware of how many cases we have in the county. Like I said before, right? 80% of people who have West Nile virus don't have any symptoms at all. And so, of course, the ones that are going to get reported to us and the ones we're going to know about are the ones that come in with paralysis or they're going blind. And then they go ahead and they get tested and surprise, you have West Nile virus, right? Like I said before, most of us, we get a bug bite, we just put some anti-itch cream on it and then we go about our days. Who knows, we could have West Nile virus. You know, some of us in this room may have West Nile virus right now and does not know it. Okay, so once again, let's talk about climate change. Oh yeah, do you have a question? No? Okay, yeah. Okay, so talking about climate change and West Nile virus, how is it affected? Once again, emerging science, right? So West Nile virus has only been in the United States since, or at least only been in California since 2003, right? So we've only had West Nile virus for 20 years. And once again, thinking about the time scale that climate change science is talking about, centuries, 20 years to centuries, that time scale isn't matching up just yet. That said, there are a few hypotheses, some things that we think might be affecting West Nile virus that have to do with the climate. First one is bird behavior. Where's my laser? Here it is, bird behavior, right? So we know that birds are the main host for West Nile virus, right? So mosquitoes aren't the ones that get sick with West Nile virus. Mosquitoes bite a bird that has West Nile virus, and then they come and bite us, and then now we have West Nile virus. And so if the birds are sticking around because it's warmer, they don't feel like it's really cold, so they have to go fly south for the winter as much, then that's a higher period of time, a higher length of time that the mosquitoes have access to these birds that could give them West Nile virus. Really similar thing, I touched on this earlier, right? So instances where we see increased rain or flooding, right? We know that mosquitoes love water. And so if there's more water for them to have children in and have babies in, then there's going to be more mosquitoes flying around, and more mosquitoes means a higher chance of one of them finding you and going ahead and biting you. The next thing here is hotter or milder temperatures, right? So it's not just the birds that are affected by the temperatures, it's also the mosquitoes themselves, right? So we know that mosquitoes usually stop being active around the time of the first frost. It gets too cold for them. They stop having what's called blood meals. They stop drinking blood because they realize it's too cold. It's not worth it for them. They're just going to go do something else. And so if that first frost happens later and later in the year, then that's so much more time that these mosquitoes are active and biting people, right? So if the first frost used to happen first week of October, and now it's not going to happen until Thanksgiving, then that's almost 2 months of extra time of mosquitoes that are out there biting people. Okay, do you have any questions so far? Yes.
Are you saying that mosquitoes, there's nothing for me to bite a mosquito, it's a mosquito?
Yeah.
The way it's trying, it has to bite the bird.
Yes, exactly. So hold on, let me get a drink of water.
What caused the bird to get it?
Okay, yeah. So yes, so the question was like, so there's nothing special about the mosquito. The mosquito is just, the mosquito has to bite the bird, and then the mosquito spreads the West Nile virus. And yes, that's exactly right. So mosquitoes are what's called a vector, right? So a vector means, a vector when it comes to disease is kind of the intermediate. It's the middleman when it comes to a disease, right? So the thing that's sick is the bird. The mosquito drinks that blood, has the, is like kind of contaminated with that West Nile virus in the same way that like a syringe for a shot would be contaminated with blood. And then when it goes and drinks from you, surprise, all of that West Nile virus gets into you. Where does the bird get the West Nile virus was the second question. Probably from other birds or some other animal that got it. So there was probably some sort of patient zero animal. And then now all of these birds are spreading mosquito or spreading West Nile virus to each other via the mosquitoes. Yeah.
I know there's been a vaccine for horses
Yes.
for decades. Is
Yes.
there any plan to make that available for humans?
So yes, so great question. So there's been a vaccine for horses. Yes, that's true. Is there plans to have that be for humans? My understanding is yes, because I can't imagine why they wouldn't be working on that. But I don't know what the status on that is. So presumably there's some sort of like problem that they're trying to surmount before they make that available. Yeah. Yeah, over here.
So this West Nile virus, is it almost the same as like a dengue fever that destroys platelets?
So it is similar in the sense that they are both transmitted by mosquitoes, right? They're both vector-borne diseases, right? Same thing, the mosquito goes ahead and gets the dengue or the West Nile virus from someone or something, some animal, spreads it to other people that it bites. I'm not actually entirely sure the mechanism of disease. So that's actually a great question. I can go ahead and keep that in mind. And I can see if, Richard, maybe I can email you with an answer for that. No, okay.
I didn't hear the question.
Well, so the question was, is West Nile virus similar to dengue in that it destroys the platelets? And so I don't actually know the answer to that, but I can go ahead and find that out and then maybe email you and then you can send it to everyone. Okay, so great question. Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna move on then. Okay, we're gonna talk about congenital syphilis next. So congenital syphilis is one of our STDs, our sexually transmitted diseases. And congenital syphilis is a little bit special because it is, like it says, congenital, which means it is present from birth. So syphilis is one of the few sexually transmitted diseases that can pass from the pregnant person to the fetus before the fetus is born, right? There are a bunch of sexually transmitted diseases that can pass from pregnant person to fetus during birth, right? Because think about, if during birth, the fetus is coming in direct contact with a lot of the places that disease is going to be. But syphilis is one of the diseases that can actually pass the placenta and infect the fetus in the womb. So when it comes to congenital syphilis, right, the symptoms on the fetus or the child are going to be really different depending on what stage they're in and whether or not they get treatment in time. So a lot of the time what happens with congenital syphilis is actually just a stillbirth. So unfortunately that fetus, that future child does not survive and they end up just dying in utero. If the baby is born, then there are a couple of symptoms. It's that second line there. They have things like snuffles, rash, an enlarged spleen, anemia, so they have a blood problem, jaundice, which happens when your liver doesn't work correctly, and some bone problems, some other things as well. If that child still doesn't get treated and they begin to kind of advance into toddler, childhood, teenager, and things like that, they might continue to experience some symptoms as well, right? So their teeth could develop incorrectly, something that we call Hutchinson's teeth and mulberry molars. They might develop what's called a saddle nose when their nose doesn't develop the way that it should. There might be problems with hearing, so deafness, blindness, things like that as well. With syphilis, the silver lining here is that treatment is relatively simple and also well known, right? So the basic treatment for syphilis is just start antibiotics and start antibiotics as soon as possible as well. And that goes for both the pregnant person and also if the fetus is born with congenital syphilis, starting those antibiotics as soon as possible on the baby as well. Okay, so I just want to give a warning, viewer discretion advised here. So I am going to go over some pictures of some of those symptoms, right? I think that some of those names were not really indicative for what that actually means. So viewer discretion advised. I don't think they're actually that graphic, but you can decide what you want to do about it. Okay, so here we have a picture of a baby with once again, scientists would call it rhinitis with mucopurulent nasal discharge. Normal people would call it runny nose with pussy mucus. This is the symptom that we refer to as snuffles. Here we see some of that rash. So those dark spots on the feet here are the syphilis lesions as well. Here we have an example of Hutchinson's teeth. Pay attention to these incisors right here, the front teeth. You can see how they're kind of flattened and they have kind of like a serration to them. Teeth don't normally develop that way. Mulberry molars. It's this molar right here. It's named because it looks a little bit like a mulberry. Think like raspberry or blackberry. It's kind of bubbly texture. Once again, teeth aren't supposed to develop that way. And here we have someone who has reached adulthood and is showing a lot of those symptoms of congenital syphilis, right? So this photo was taken back in the 70s. So this person's probably like 70 to 80. at this point. But you can see here that in his, what is this? In his right eye, he has some cataracts. You can see the Hutchinson's teeth and mulberry molars, and also a good example of that saddle nose, that really flat nose where it didn't develop the way that it should. Okay, so talking about a congenital syphilis, when it comes to prevention, congenital syphilis is actually a great illustration of what we call the 3 stages of prevention. Has anyone heard of this before? No? Okay, so the 3 stages of prevention is basically a model that we use in public health to show the scope of our prevention efforts, right? So as we get lower, we tend to consider this better because it prevents people from having problems and is also reaching a wider audience of people as well. So I'll go through each of them and then let's see if we can fill this out together. So primary prevention represents removing the hazard or risk. The goal of primary prevention is to prevent anyone from even having the problem in the first place. Next, we have secondary prevention. That's when we're targeting an at-risk population, right? So we weren't able to remove the problem from completely happening, but we know that certain people might be more likely to experience that problem. How can we help them not have that problem? And third thing here is reducing harm. So tertiary prevention is reducing harm. So when, that's when, oh no, the problem has happened. How do we make sure that the problem is as least bad as possible? It does the least amount of harm as we can have it happen. So I'll give you kind of the first level primary prevention, and let's see if we can fill out the secondary and tertiary preventions. So when it comes to primary syphilis or congenital syphilis, primary prevention is when the pregnant person is never at risk for syphilis. Syphilis isn't even in the picture. So there's no chance of the baby or the fetus having congenital syphilis, right? So now let's think about secondary prevention, right? So we weren't able to completely eliminate the chance. What can we do to reduce the risk as much as possible? What are some ideas? Yeah, so I heard, providing medication. That's exactly what I thought of, right? So the pregnant person, okay, we went ahead, we tested them. Turns out, okay, they have syphilis, but that's fine because we can go ahead and get them those antibiotics they need so that they don't pass it to the fetus and also so that they feel better too. Exactly. Okay, tertiary prevention, reducing harm. So, oh no, congenital syphilis has happened. The baby was born, they have syphilis. What can we do to make sure that we reduce the amount of harm that that baby experiences? Yes, exactly, right? So now we are still concerned about treating the parent, but we're also concerned about separately treating the baby, right? So the baby was already born with syphilis. We can't prevent that anymore, but we can make sure that they get better as soon as possible. And so the amount of harm that the syphilis does to them is as low as possible. Good job. Okay, so congenital syphilis. Once again, why is Central Valley unique? So this is once again one of those unfortunate achievements, just like West Nile virus. Central Valley is unique, especially Stanislaus County and also actually San Joaquin County, because there's just a lot of congenital syphilis in this area. So I've gone ahead and I have graphed the 2020 congenital syphilis rates per 100,000 live births. So basically, for every 100,000 live births, how many of those babies have congenital syphilis? And I've graphed that here. So you can see here all the way on the left, that's us, Stanislaus County. Statewide, you can see is about half of us. So we're about double the rate for the entire state. San Joaquin County, like I mentioned, is actually slightly worse than us. So they have a little bit more congenital syphilis in their area. But then I went ahead and I picked out some of those big metropolitan areas, right? Once again, these are the areas that we would expect to have a ton of cases because there's a lot of people that live there. And you can see, right, these are way lower, right? So San Francisco is maybe a quarter of what we have, Sacramento maybe a third, and Los Angeles about half of what we have, right? So we are seeing just a lot of congenital syphilis in our community as well. For people who like kind of concrete numbers a little bit more, I also kind of delineated everyone's ranking out of 40. So there are 58 counties here in California. The reason it's out of 40 is because some counties are tied in ranking. A lot of those counties are tied at 0 cases, so their case rate is 0. Good for them, I guess. A lot of the time it's also because they have like 500 people in that county as well. But you can see here that out of 40, we are 11. And so for a county our size to be that high in the ranking is quite problematic as well. Okay, so talking about congenital syphilis, how does climate change affect it? What do we think I'm going to reveal about the status of research with climate change and congenital syphilis? It's emerging science. Ooh. Yeah, so once again, for the same reasons, right? Climate science really is looking at such a large timescale that when we're looking at these diseases, it's a little bit difficult to determine what the actual effects are, just because the timescales are not matching up here at once. Here, there is a little bit more that does exist. So I was able to find some frameworks and hypotheses that are currently being looked at already. So there's this one review, comprehensive review. Oh, is that a question in the back? No? Okay. So I was able to find a comprehensive review by Leiber et al. That suggested that after disasters, so natural disasters that might be more common with climate change, sexual diseases, sexually transmitted diseases may increase through these 4 factors. So increased migration, so as people lose their homes because they burn down or there's a flood or there's a big earthquake, they're going to move on to other areas where maybe there may be an increased incident of infectious disease. Infrastructure erosion, right? So if people lose access to their doctors because the hospital is underwater, then obviously they're not going to be able to receive the medical care that they might need. And also food insecurity, right? So food is one of our basic needs. So if there's circumstances that make it hard for someone to get that food, then they might be willing to do things, for example, survival or transactional sex that could cause a transmission or spread of STDs in exchange for access to that food. There was another study that happened, or a review that happened through by Women Deliver, that kind of echoed some of those same hypotheses, right? So they suggested that disruptions to health services, once again, because the hospital is not accessible because the roads have all collapsed because of an earthquake, could potentially make it harder for people to get treatment. And also there could be increased sexual or gender-based violence, right? So if there is some sort of natural disaster that happens, the high stress situation could cause all of this violence to unfold. That said, there are some limits and gaps to this, right? So a lot of the time, these studies were looking at specific diseases. So for example, Leiber et al., the one that made this framework here, was looking specifically at HIV and AIDS. So is that necessarily, will that translate to congenital syphilis? We don't know that. Same thing, time frame of event, right? So a lot of these reviews are looking at natural disasters, right? So some gigantic flood, or there's a big wildfire. When it comes to climate change, we also know that there's all of the slow burn over decades and centuries, slow increase in temperature. How is that going to affect things? We don't know that yet. And same thing, location and area, right? So all of these studies and all of these reviews are looking at events that happen in specific locations. So for example, a lot of them actually are looking at what people call developing countries, which is a term that I personally hate. But these developing countries obviously have different challenges that might not necessarily be applicable to somewhere like here, which is considered a developed country. So the point with this, this research and also all of the research that I talked about when it comes to climate change is that there's lots of room for it. So if any of you are, looking at making this your career, then hey, you have things to be studying as well. Also, if any of you need a project for next semester, here you go. Remember me. So yeah, lots of room for research still continuing. Okay, and that actually brings me to the end. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for letting me exist in your time and space. Yeah.